Okay, so I think we can call to order and we'll make sure, I'll do the roll call. So Trustee Foss,
Here.
Trustee Chakravarti is here, and also Lee. Before we approve the minutes, I'd like to hear if there's a motion to allow Suzanne, who is injured, to join us remotely. Is there a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, I move.
Okay.
I'm the only person who can, right?
Yes, right. And I will second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So approved. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Second step is the approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes that
So
Kaya sent?
moved.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Is there a second? Thank you, Suzanne. Then we have public comments. So I did not receive any public comments via email. I did not receive any notification that the board president has gotten any public comments via email. Lee, did you get anything? Okay, there's also nobody waiting and nobody signed up. So I think that means that we can move directly into the executive director search discussion. So hi, good morning.
Hello.
Good noon.
And sorry, just for clarity, Luzanne is on Oak Park's committee on the communications team. Is that right? Confirming.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I see a box with Luzanne
Hi.
on the screen. Do you see that?
Hi.
Okay.
Yes, I'm a reporter for the Wednesday Journal, so I'm just attending the meeting virtually.
Okay.
Yep. Mhm.
I'm sorry. I just didn't know if there was any comments or anything we need to address there. Okay.
Nope,
Great.
all good.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. So I know that you have updates for us. Welcome, friends from COAB. I wanted to make sure that we figure out some of the logistics that have to do with the meetings on Monday and next Friday. So I will say that the current strategy, I think that what we're going to do is have, we'll have to start an open session. The interviews will be, of course, in closed session. Closed session does have to be recorded legally, but it'll be an audio recording and not a video recording. And really that recording is not like available except unless FOIA or, you know, like in some other way, right?
And when these things were like available for 3 years and then they get
Then they get discarded.
destroyed, right?
Yes, but that's the board, they're kept separately in a locked box, and it's up to the board. Staff do not interact with those.
Right.
This is helpful. Sorry, Madarima.
Go ahead. No. Go.
I was going to say this is helpful to know, just to clarify, you all have to be in open session, but a candidate at this stage whose confidentiality we're still protecting does not need to be part of the open session. You would meet in open session and then you would join them in a closed.
Absolutely. And they would, you know, so that's I'm assuming everyone's doing this remotely, so they would join us in closed session.
And we've sent out some Zoom links already for what would end up, it sounds like, being the closed session. Does that work, or do the Zoom links need to come from you? Do you need to own the Zoom links?
Yeah, we need to send the Zoom links because those need to be posted on the library's board website, you know, like, the closed session link obviously won't be posted.
Right. But still needs to come from you.
Own them, right? The Zoom
Yes,
links need to come from us,
because they do need to be posted on the board page on the library website.
but not the closed session.
Not the
link.
closed session.
So
can the closed
was
session? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Can the closed session be Koya to make sure that like we don't have any snags?
I don't think so. I think that we have to own that. But there was what we were talking about. So that's right before the meeting, is that maybe we'll just use the links for this meeting for Monday's meeting. So we have both of those sets. So we have the open session link for today and the closed session for today, and that's what we'll use for the Monday meetings.
Yeah. So actually, Amber, if you can just send them that Zoom link, we're just gonna use the same Zoom link that we're using today.
Okay. And can someone please send me some language around the need for recording? Because we will need to share that with candidates and make sure they're aware that they'll be recorded in a closed session. And to Ted's point, that what happens with it, how long it's kept, all of that, because we would want candidates to be fully informed if they're being recorded and
Yes.
ensure that we've got their consent in doing that.
And my understanding about Monday is that both Madarima and I will be here in person. Our candidates will be on Zoom, and Koya will be on Zoom.
And Suzanne will be on Zoom.
And Zoom, right.
Yes. Okay, so I will do that, Amber, today, by the end of today for sure. I'll make sure that what I understand to be the procedure and protocol is, I'll like confirm that what I understand is fair, and then I'll send it to you. Okay, so I also wanted to talk a little bit about the form that those, again, to navigate this whole open session, closed session thing. The form that we're assuming that the interviews on Monday, and I think that if it makes sense, then the interviews on Friday to do as well, which is that, you know, again, obviously the interviews will be in closed session. As you know, we have to start an open session, we have to vote to go into closed session, and then after closed session is done, we like come back to open session and adjourn the meeting there. So instead of having to do that multiple times for each interview, we're going to start the open session 15 minutes before our first interview, then we'll go into closed session, then we'll have a recess from within closed session, then we'll have the second interview, then we'll close that out, and then we'll come at the end of all of that back to open session. So that there will be a recess, the recess, you know, that we have scheduled, and then that will be within the framework of the closed session. Does that make sense?
So
It
Greg
does.
then starts 15 minutes after 1 o'clock.
No, we'll just come here earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'll update the calendar invites, Ted, so that's reflected. So you'll have a 15-minute closed session calendar invite from 12:45 to 1. The interview with the candidate, and then I'll create another 15-minute open session link at the very end of the day so that you've got all of it
Yeah.
all on your calendar.
Thank you. And we don't, you know, we won't need the full 15 minutes, but that's, I mean, at the end of the day, so that's totally fine. And I assume we won't need a full 15 minutes at the top either, but I'm always surprised. So, and I think that, I know that we're still waiting to see if we will have additional candidates that we're interviewing on Friday. Is that right? Right, on the 17th. So, the assumption is that we will use that same model for Friday, unless there's something is up about the schedule, and then we can figure that out. Either we can figure that out Monday, but also since that's not the kind of thing that we need to do even in open session when it comes to actually the scheduling stuff, we can do that via email.
Okay. So this link, which we'll reuse on Monday, had a waiting room. And I just want to I would confirm that nobody will make a change to that because you'll have one candidate sign into this link and then 30 minutes later, potentially another candidate. And if the second candidate signs in early or just wants to test their Zoom or something like that, we do want them to get stuck in a waiting room. We don't want them to enter into the first candidate's interview. So as we're preparing for Monday, we just ask that nobody make any changes to that waiting room setting. We want to keep the waiting room.
Is that, we can do that, right? We can continue to have a waiting room for both links?
Mm-hmm.
The owl is not capable of joining meetings with waiting rooms.
The owl is not capable of...
Joining meetings with waiting rooms.
So can we, is it possible that after we join, then we turn the waiting room on?
Yes, we should be.
So our two candidates on Monday are from which time zones?
I don't, I mean, either way, for us, I don't want to, I don't even want to think about that, but I do think that either way, you know, I mean, I understand we want to make sure that their privacy is maintained. So I think that I'll just come early to Monday's meetings and make sure that we are joined, and then we can turn the waiting room, or that we start the owl and then we can turn the waiting room on. Is
Yeah.
that okay?
And I'll
Okay.
tell candidates not to join until it's their time to
Yes, that would
hopefully
be great.
minimize any concern here. But if we can have the waiting room, it is really helpful specifically for that reason.
I'm
Okay.
just curious, do you usually do different links for different interviews?
Yeah, just to make sure that we don't have
Mhm.
anybody enter into anything else that they shouldn't be entering into. I think this will work. And again, we'll let candidates know to sign in at their time. But as a fail safe, having the waiting room is helpful.
Okay, I'll make sure that I'm here even earlier on Monday so we can go ahead and start the OWL system. Okay, I think in terms of making sure that the logistics of the actual planning around the meeting, as far as like what the library needs and, you know, has to maintain, I think that's all that I had. I know that, of course, we have other conversations that we need to have about the upcoming interviews and stuff, right? And of course, the report. Suzanne, do you have anything before I turn it over to Koya?
No, I think we should turn to Corday.
Okay, Ted?
I do. I love the fact that we have these questions and we try to be equal with each interviewer or interviewee. But how many times can I interject a strange question?
It's a good question, Ted. And one thing that we do want to touch base on, talking about the interview questions, who asks what and what that looks like, is a big part of today. Do you want to do that and then talk about the community report, or do you want a quick overview on the community report first?
Are you okay if we do the community report
Yes.
first and make sure that we get back to your
Yeah,
question?
in the community report, what interested me most about that was the fact that the board doesn't seem to be really important to the community.
Yeah. I will say, Trisha, I think were you about to jump in and be like, let's do questions first, since that's most important for Monday?
I was just going to just jump to that part of the agenda, which was the first part of the agenda, and kind of start there, which is to say, obviously, we sent out that survey. We received over 200 responses from the community, and then we had 2 open office hours this week. For the staff office hours, no one showed up, and for the community office hours, 1 person showed up, and we talked for an hour. A couple of people tried to pop in throughout, but then signed right off, just to give that overview. What Amber was getting at is, you know, we have interviews Monday. We want to focus on the question part of this, and we want to focus on prepping for Monday, but that there's a lot to digest in this, and we fully anticipate that we could have a whole session just about this report. And we should, but maybe it's not fully today. We just wanted to give you kind of the high level report out or responses from that survey. And so Amber can walk through that report, but again, really the only thing the most important part is like the questions coming out of that the community has to ask candidates. And so, yeah.
Sorry, Trisha. I was gonna say, is it okay to share the screen?
That's what I was gonna say. Can we just jump into that overview quickly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you sharing the screen of people's responses?
The overall report, not the raw data.
Just want to know if people knew that was going to happen.
Totally. So pretty straightforward. I think what I wanted to highlight for folks is that, first of all, as a reminder, we asked 5 questions. They were very open-ended. The hope with the open-endedness being we could kind of capture everything that came back from, like, anything that anybody wanted to say, right? We weren't trying to direct folks into a certain area or a certain topic. It was hugely open. I think some folks appreciated that. Some folks were like, why are you asking this? So I would say mixed reviews on that strategy. The other thing I would say, and we all know this, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves why we asked now. This is a good gut check to make sure that as we're moving into interviews, we are incorporating questions that address the things community members are most interested in. So we have a job description, of course, that outlines the responsibilities, outlines the characteristics, the qualifications we want to see, which was developed in conjunction with the board and with the staff, informed by that wide range of needs assessments we did with both groups early on in the process. But it's good to go through this community survey and understand that we're aligned there. A lot of the things that community members said they were interested in, concerned about, would want to know more about are in the position profile or things that we've been using to screen candidates to cultivate a candidate pool. One last thing I'll mention there about the timing of this is we did ask for any last recommendations from community members, and this is a good time to do that. Yes, we have 4 to 6 candidates that we know we want to interview in the coming week. But sometimes it happens you get to the very end of a search and someone's like, why didn't you reach out to Ebony? And we're trying to kind of preempt that last minute, like, what about this person by having this conversation, asking for like a last round of recommendations right now. Because of course, if any of those recommendations pan out as potential candidates, we can kind of loop them into the process as we're finishing up the first rounds this month and before we get too far into further rounds. So wanted to make sure we all had that context. In terms of the survey, you'll find the slides are related to the very broad questions that we asked. And I think one thing that's helpful to understand about this is that it's a qualitative survey. So there is some subjectivity in terms of how I specifically coded things, right? So if you're looking at what do you envision to be the top 3 key responsibilities of the executive director, I read through the raw data, and if someone said something like budget management, I coded it as organizational management. If somebody said something like HR or personnel, I coded it as staff leadership. But there are certainly areas within this report that are subjective. I think a very good example would be if we get to the question of personal qualities. I coded intelligent and knowledgeable as 1 category. You might want to code that as 2 categories if you were to look through the raw data yourself. Or I coded balanced, calm, steadfast as 1 category. You might actually want to break that out further. So I think it's important for the board to be aware of the raw data, which of course we'll share with you, and to have the opportunity to digest that and see what the details are. But I think when you're looking at the overall slide deck, having an understanding that I think it's reflective of the raw data, but there might be some slight differences in how, if you looked at the raw data and coded it, how you might code it differently than I did.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Like, on the personal qualities and how that presents with the slide you're on. Is that, do the different sizes and all of that have any relationship, and how did you do that?
Yeah, a little bit of weight here. So here's an example of kind of the range. The top category is competent, experienced, proven, skilled. I saw that kind of category come up in 74 responses. So you'll see that the competent, experienced, proven, skilled. Oh, actually, sorry, let me see. It should be larger, but I don't know that it's not quite as large as you might expect it to be given the difference in fonts. So I can definitely go back and change the fonts, but in theory, that should be the largest possible kind of bucket. Whereas kind of the median critical thinker, engaging, has sets professional boundaries, relationship builder, resilient, self-aware, should be showing up a little bit smaller because those came up 8 times instead of 74 times. And the minimum, we had people say things like able to compromise, ambitious, fair, fun, patient. And if there was a quality that was shared at least twice, that's kind of represented on here. But I can certainly update. This is the first time I've used this cloud generator. I can certainly update this cloud generator to make sure that the size is more corresponding to the number of times it came up.
And what was
Uh,
the last list that you just gave? The qualities, you said something about able to compromise or something? Was that lumped
yeah.
with others?
Not lumped together, but I will say the w- able to compromise was came up twice, ambitious twice, fair twice, fun twice, patient twice. So those were three or four different qualities that each came up two times
And they're in separate categories. Sorry, I'm
in
trying
separate
to.
categories. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I
Mhm.
thought that was done. I just wanted to make sure we knew, all knew.
So Amber, this is a really cute graphic, but it was really hard for me to understand.
Okay.
So were these done like whiteboard and you were just writing these things down, or?
Yeah, it was a bit of there's a cloud generator which I use, but I can certainly change the graphics on here so it's more clear before this goes to the full board.
Because it was really, really hard for me to
Yeah,
cipher.
totally fair. So we'll change that. But I think
I've seen it in webinars where it kind of works, where it's a different kind of, but for
yeah,
something like this, I think it might be better to have a different
sure.
way to look at it.
Yeah, and I can make that update. I think the main takeaway I would share from these kind of initial slides are there's nothing represented in personal qualities that we haven't discussed. So there's no surprises really in terms of the personal qualities that folks would be looking for in executive director of a library. That's the same for like the types of professional experience. Um, what I would and I would say in terms of the top three key responsibilities, nothing in here is a surprise, but one thing that came up much more strongly, I think, from the community survey than we've heard in other settings. And again, we've talked about this in other settings, but I think this was maybe strongest from the community setting was safety, which is included in this graphic fairly largely because that was something that was noted with a fair amount of frequency. I think for the purposes of Monday, what's most important to be aware of are the responses to the question we asked about what do you want to learn from an executive director? What kinds of questions would you ask them? We've shared some of those responses as they align with the position profile. And there are questions in here that are represented in the questions we're about to go over and decide on for Monday. So that's good. Like um, your experience managing a budget. Cool. We're going to ask about that, right? Like your experience managing a staff. Great. We're going to ask about that. Is it worded exactly the way a community member has worded it? Not necessarily, but a lot of those themes about core competencies are represented in our first round interview questions. So no big surprises there. However, there are questions in these slides that would be very good fodder for the second and third rounds. So in a first round, are we going to talk about in a high level of detail the experience that they might have had with book bans? Likely not in a huge level of detail. It might come up in some of the responses to the questions that we've got planned to ask. But this could be a really good question to ask somebody in a second round when we're kind of digging deeper into, all right, we've established you have these qualifications. We've established you can manage these responsibilities. Now let's talk about the specifics of how you would go about doing that. Some of these questions from community members would be really good to include in a second round with the search committee, or even in kind of that final round as they're meeting more, the like 1 to 3 candidates are meeting more folks at Oak Park Public Library. So there's a lot in here that I think is going to end up being really helpful later down the road.
I thought so too. I was really impressed with the questions, and I think it reflects the kind of intelligence and commitment of our community.
So I think for now, what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll update these graphics so they're more legible, more digestible, so that you can, and we'll prepare an email that you could send to the full board that will include both all of the raw data, again, 218 responses, as well as some of these slide decks. or excuse me, as well as this slide deck. And then we'll want to talk about all of this more when you've had a chance to digest it fully as a board. But for now, I would say key takeaways, no big surprises in terms of what they would want us to be focusing on and what types of questions they would want us to ask. Maybe a couple of themes like safety that have come out more strongly in this kind of format than we've heard in other spaces, but certainly we've talked about safety in other spaces. And a lot of really good questions, many of which are kind of aligned with the questions we're already planning to ask in the first round, but many of which are going to be very good for second and third.
What is
oh, sorry, go ahead, Tarima.
what is so safety is sort of, I guess I'm not really clear about what, if there was a trend in what those questions were about. I mean, is it the safety of the staff of the library, given the things that have happened recently, that have been incredibly disruptive and unsettling, or is it safety of patrons while they're in the library? I'm having a hard time parsing.
So this
Patrons
is,
in
this
the
is,
library.
this is the,
Patrons in the library.
so this is the community.
This is the
worried
community
about safety.
saying, community saying we want to be safe in the library. We want our children to be safe in the library. I think a little bit of safety around staff, but I don't, I think if you're reading through the raw data, it won't necessarily be a surprise that the community members are talking about their own safety in response to this, which again, we've discussed safety as a board, and we've talked about safety of both patrons and staff. Community members have said our safety primarily, but there have been some responses will reflect safety concerns for staff.
Okay, thank you.
Timeline of this, was this after the shooting outside the library?
Yeah, so we sent the survey out
right after that too, so that makes a lot of sense that would really rise to the top.
Yeah, and we sent the survey out, I believe, the 20th of December. So in terms of timing, everything that's in this is representative from about responses that we received from the 20th of December through noon on Tuesday.
So Amber, as we come to this, I go back to my question. Can I ask renegade questions occasionally? So I'm thinking about safety. And one of the questions I would like to ask prospective executive director is, how do we lure people back to the library who say to me, oh, I would never have my child go to the public library. This could happen, or that could happen, or these people are there. And so how do we make it a library for all? That's the kind of question I would ask. Now, is that out of line?
Well, I do want to really anchor us in the first round of interview questions being pretty consistent among every candidate. The second round is going to be a little bit more free-flowing. They will not be prescribed questions. I do think that I don't want candidates coming in and we don't get to really the core competencies of the job description, and we talk a lot about maybe what's currently happening at the library or what has happened at the library. Those are more for people that are in the second round interview. So I guess I would say I don't know what you termed it, odd questions that you want to plug in. I think
So
the
Tricia,
first
I'll
round,
keep my mouth shut.
I think follow-up questions to what they answer are fair if you want to follow up, but I think that if we don't want to veer too far off of what we're preparing for in this round. Amber, I don't know if you were going to say that or add anything to it.
Yeah, I think at this stage, we know, Trisha and I are confident that the people you are interviewing and the additional folks will suggest in closed session have core competencies, right? This first round is for you to get comfortable with an understanding directly from the candidates where those core competencies really shine and where the maybe level of experience that they have may not be quite the right fit for Oak Park. So really focused on core competencies at this stage. And then the question at the end is, who do you want to learn more from? And who do you want to have those types of conversations with, Ted?
Right.
So Richard said the second round is much more free flowing.
Thanks.
But in the first, really good to ask the same questions of all candidates so you can get a sense of like, okay, like, yes, everybody, this is the kind of as much as possible, and it's never truly possible because everybody is different, and it will answer the same exact question in 3 different ways. Apples to apples comparison of, okay, this is this person's management experience. This is this person's experience with diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism training. This is their experience with staff management, and have that as a basis to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, if it's important to you to ask the question, like, how do you make a library inclusive and accessible to all, or you just don't want to like fly in and ask one candidate that and then not the others, and then that candidates then weight it based on that answer, and the other people didn't have an opportunity to answer it. That's what we're really trying to keep watch on.
Do folks feel comfortable moving to the conversation on what questions we are going to ask on Monday?
Yeah, I was actually
Doing
going to
that.
suggest, it seems like a good segue.
Good segue. Yeah. And I can share my screen again. Is that all right with folks?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we do have a list right now of 11 questions, which you all have reviewed, and I understand a little bit of feedback from other folks as well. This is narrowed down from the original list, so we're on the right track. But in a 60-minute interview, you, especially given that some of these are larger questions, may not get to you're probably not going to get to 11 questions. Um, there's one that we might be able to save for a second round. And there's one area that we might be able to choose one or the other or combine. Do folks feel okay if I start there? So, of course, one section, one responsibility that we want to talk about, staff leadership, development, and empowerment. We have 3 questions in this section. I think each of the 3 get at a slightly different aspect of this, but would propose potentially taking out question 3 for the first round and saving it for the second round, so that we're asking instead number 2 and number 4. How does that land with folks if we need to narrow down this list of questions?
Which one are you taking out? I'm sorry.
Number 3, it takes a lot of work and intention to lead others. What have you personally found to be the most challenging things about leadership? And what are the daily tangible things you have done to ensure the ethos of your team remains intact? It's similar to question 2. So we could ask question 2, or we could ask question 3. I think overall we're trying to get at management leadership style and experience. It's just a little, how do we want to frame it?
I think I
Like
prefer 3 to 2. I prefer 3 to 2. Yeah. Is
Okay.
that what you were saying, Suzanne? I'm sorry.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we might take,
Yeah.
Lee's also nodding.
okay. I will save this then for a second round. So again, not getting rid of it. I think when it comes to the second round, we're definitely going to have to be, we've gone through an editing process, have some questions that we might include in the second round, and we're going to need to come back to that community survey and take some of the questions from there. So just to say, not totally disappearing, being saved for further discussion when it comes to future interviews.
Okay, thank you.
The other section where we've got 2 questions that we could, I think Suzanne liked one of these, Madarima liked the other. They're both on external community communications. We might decide we need to ask both. We might decide we want to ask one, or we might want to write a totally different question that covers what we want to learn about their external community relations.
My problem with the one that is now numbered 5, because some of my comments were like talking about numbers that that changed. The one with 5, when I read that, and that, again, that might be my bias as somebody who works in communications, but that to me read like something that was talking about the job of the communications director, with talking about strategic communications and then communication strategy. So that's why I was like, that one went into a different, like, it wasn't talking about the larger picture, whereas the other one did.
Yeah, I think I agree. Suzanne, so if you're saying that it seems like a question that's really about what is in the purview of a director of communications rather than an executive director. I feel the same way. I feel like what we have as question number 4 speaks to like communication skills and approaches and values even maybe, and then that 5 maybe speaks to something that is not 100% comfortably seated within, I don't think, the role of the executive director. I mean, of course, they're ultimately responsible as they are for any member of their team, but so I would find 4 to be a more relevant question than number 5.
I agree with that.
Okay. And Ted, okay there? Okay, so
Ted, what do you think?
I'll save that for further discussion in second round. And then I think the last, I know Suzanne liked number 5, so it maybe just needs a little bit of fine tuning in terms of the exact wording. That's something that we can work on offline, I think, if Suzanne, you want to give this a little bit more thought and think about how you want to word it. The last area that it seems to me we might be able to condense a little bit is actually questions number 3 and 7 are both about navigating change. The main difference being in 7, we ask a little bit about like managing resistance to change. I might propose deleting question 7, and if we want to learn about resistance to change, maybe add that as part of the question to number 3. So when we're saying, please provide context, we're saying, what was the change? How did you include staff? You know, did you encounter any resistance? What was the end result?
I don't know. I mean, I feel, and I think it's just because uh, I'm not seeing this from the perspective that, of course, a candidate would see this question, but from my perspective, it seems to be speaking to 2 separate sort of things in our history. You know, like I think that um,
I think in this climate, in all the ways in this climate, the notion of someone resistant to change is a really significant one. You know, outward resistance and inward resistance and one-on-one, just yeah. So that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
To figure out.
If we're seeing them as 2 different, I wonder if this might actually be a space, number 7 might be a space that aligns with some of the responses we heard in the community survey, where folks were asking, what would this person do in the face of a book ban? Like, you know, so when we're talking about broader, and maybe I'm hearing you wrong, which is why I want to say this out loud in case, if we're talking about like managing broader resistance to change, are we talking about external environment, politics, landscape, threats like book bans that we want to know how they respond
I
to?
think
I like the way this was worded, honestly, because it
Okay.
includes person, organization, or system resistant to change. It includes, and we get to then understand. I don't know. I think it leaves an opening for however the person may find an entrance into that question. I liked that it was open that way, and not specific to just book bans. I mean, most librarians are against book bans. You know, it's just it's kind of in the title. So I understand the concern about that in the community, but from being on the board and knowing our staff and going to ALA conferences, librarians are amazing in that. And I'm not worried about that as much, you know? So yeah, it's a more nuanced question the way you worded it. I really liked the way that it was worded. Sorry, I'm not kind of spoke at the same time.
Sorry. I have a question now. In our interviews, we're basically cold questioning these people. They don't have the questions in advance. And so it's like one of those presidential interviews where
Well, to be fair, this is open session and being recorded, so, you know, it's not a secret. Any candidate can come look at our recording and they
Yeah.
have us talking about these questions.
Okay, so
Well, and
the first candidate will hear the questions and it will be an open session, then any other candidate will be able to hear that?
No, none
No.
of
Okay.
the questioning will happen in open session. It'll all happen in closed session.
Okay.
But I will
I'm just thinking
say
about
what
format.
we have told candidates, here are the people you are meeting. Here's your agenda. You're going to do probably about 5 minutes of introductions. You know, we've shared this with them, right? And we've told them to expect 8 to 10 questions. They're all going to be the same questions. And we've told them it's going to align with the job description. We are using this first round interview with the committee so that they can get an understanding of your professional experience as it relates to the role. So we haven't given them this exact question or this exact question, but we've said, be ready to answer questions on staff leadership development, empowerment. For example, how you work with your team, how you communicate with your team, what's your management philosophy. Be ready to talk about working with the community. That's going to be a huge part of this role, and you can expect a question on it from the committee. So we've given them, to Matt Moderima's point, if one of them watches this, they'll know the exact questions. But even if they don't watch this, they have we do want them to have a sense of like, you're going to talk about your experience as it relates to the job description. Be ready for that.
A quick question on that, since Luzanne is in the session, and this is public, are these questions things that we want to, like, we don't necessarily want those in a newspaper yet? I mean, they're on here publicly, but do we want those reported because it might weight them? And I don't know how that works, but I just thought I'd raise it.
I'm sorry, Suzanne, I didn't actually, I couldn't hear everything that you said. What was your question?
Just, sorry, is my, am I not nearly close enough to the speaker? Luzanne is here from the paper in the board meeting, and this is public. So do we have, any requests in terms of, how this is reported on? Because we don't want to wait one question over another. I mean, anybody can come and watch, you know, any of the candidates can come and watch this. But how do we, yeah. I mean, we want transparency, obviously, but we also want to have a fair process for the people being interviewed.
I think that my instinct is to not tell anybody from the Wednesday Journal or anything else about how, or make any requests about any kind of portrayal. I think that we should just do the work of choosing the questions, and then it sounds like Koya has already done a pretty decent job of making sure that the candidates aren't, you know, blindsided by any of the topics, or that they, you know, that they can prepare well. And I think short of that, we should just, you know.
Okay, great.
That's I don't know if anybody else wants to chip in, but like, I think that we should
I
just.
was just worried about their being blindsided, so I think that Amber has answered that question.
Right.
And we have shared with candidates that there are open sessions, right? So we haven't told anybody you should go to this one, but like, they know. So it's up to them to decide if they want to see this recording later, they will do it. If they don't, then they don't. But they've got some information from us so that regardless of whether or not they make that personal decision, they won't be totally blindsided by what you're going to talk about.
I get that, and they're not going to be blindsided because we prep them. But you know, this is the first time as a search firm that I'm here where these questions could possibly end up in the public, and I feel like there's a lot of clients we have that actually feel like it's a fair thing to give candidates the questions ahead of time. And I would want to be consistent with that. If we think that some candidates are going to show up having seen them and some not, that doesn't feel good. I'll be honest. Feels like a trap. Like, oh, well, if they found it, that's great. And if they didn't, they didn't. That doesn't.
No, I mean, I think we should just have the conversation. Like, it sounds like you're doing everything you can to level the playing field before anybody comes in. And I think that we have our questions in front of us, and I think that we should do the work of what we're supposed to be doing in open session and in full transparency, which is, you know, the discussion of the questions, but not in any way compromise the, privacy of candidates or share any information like that. So I think that, yeah,
Are
I don't
you
know.
Trisha, are you suggesting that then we should send them to everybody?
Sort of what I'm getting at, I think.
That's what I was
Just-
wondering, because
Yeah.
it could get to, I can't remember if it was adjacency bias or locate, what's the
Availability bias?
availability bias, or, with the idea of like that people who live nearby and might see, especially that's why I thought about the Wednesday Journal, that it may like then give bias toward people who are close by versus people from other states, et cetera. So that's why I just wanted to.
Oh, so is the question like, once we're done deciding if we give them the actual questions that we have? Because that sounds like a great idea to me. That sounds fantastic. Does anybody have any
What are your
objections?
thoughts, Amber and Trisha, on that?
Did you say that sounds fantastic? What did you say? It sound,
Yeah,
What did you say?
to me, that sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Suzanne, and if that's what you were saying, Trisha, that sounds great. That sounds really good.
Yeah. I mean, some people really like that. People have jobs and lives, and actually getting the questions ahead of time is
Yeah,
they can be
and we
prepared
don't,
is
right,
And then
it's
they can
not,
think about it, and then we get,
yeah, we're
yeah,
not
I
trying
don't
to
think we
trap
need
them.
to, yeah, I don't think it needs to be on the spot unless that's your experience, doing this. But
Yeah,
I just, given that it could create bias, I just was wanting to make sure we had a level playing field here.
Yeah, often we do work with folks with organizations that do send the first round interview questions. I think the question for some people is like, well, how will we know that they can respond on the spot when they need to, though, like in the future? And our response to that is that's what a second round interview is that, right? Your second round interview isn't going to be fully scripted. So they will have to respond on some on the spot questions in a second
Yeah.
round, and certainly in a final round. Who knows what folks are going to ask them at that stage because we're bringing so many other people in.
yeah.
So the first round, it may not be important to have an understanding of how they can respond on the spot because we'll find out the answer to that question in future rounds with candidates who advance.
I like that.
I'm comfortable with that.
sounds great. So then can we, so we were still maybe trying to decide between 3 and 7, right? Or are we trying to figure out a way
Yeah.
to combine 3 and 7?
I think if we're giving candidates the questions in advance and they have a chance to think through what they want to share, we have found that it's possible to get through more questions. So I don't
Okay.
think we have to make a choice, given that we're going to give candidates the questions.
Oh,
Plus, I think if you really want 7, we're not going to push back. Keep 7.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're.
It's just, I think one benefit of giving people the questions is like, they know now I have to get through all of these and they'll think about, I'm going to spend more time here and less time here and more detail, and they'll kind of prepare themselves accordingly to get through 9 questions, as opposed to if they just generally know they're going to have 8 to 10 and have to talk themselves through something on the spot.
Then I think that's perfect because I think they're similar, but I think they allow an opportunity for different information. And if they have them in advance, they can decide
Yep.
what they wear.
So talking about procedure on Monday, we basically have the members of the search committee ask the question 1, and then question 2, and question 3.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And actually,
that's-
Ted, we'll assign you questions now. So now that we've got our list of 9 questions, we're going to put your names by the ones you are asking. And I'm Madarima. I hope that you don't mind. I'm volunteering you as the chair that often the chair goes first.
Oh, okay.
So
That's
that's one potential starting point. And this initial question is an opportunity. You will, and Trisha will be joining you for these interviews. So she'll welcome the candidate into the room. She'll, be warm, let them know if they need a drink of water, they should do that. Like, how can we make the space comfortable for you? That kind of thing. Remind them of this format and what to expect. Like, we're going to do introductions, we're going to do questions, and then it'll be your turn for questions. And then we'll have she'll have you all introduce yourselves pretty briefly, name, role, pronouns, how you got involved. And then Madarima, you would ask this first question. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about how Oak Park Public Library's work resonates with your personal goals and values? What attracts you to this opportunity? So a chance for them to say, like, this is who I am, and this is why I'm specifically interested in Oak Park. So it's a little bit of a warm entry into an interview. It's not a question, a really hard-hitting question right off the bat necessarily. And then we'll kind of move through the rest of these questions. If folks have particular ones that they know they want to ask, we can assign that to you right now. Otherwise, what we often do is just alphabetical at this point, like Madarima, Lee. And now I have to think about the alphabet, and does S or T come first? But like Suzanne, Ted, Madarima, Lee, Suzanne, Ted, Madarima. So we can assign either way, but it's very helpful to know ahead of time which questions you're asking and when you need to be prepared to come off mute or speak up. So we do like to assign questions in advance.
Can we take a minute to see if people have questions that they would like to ask from this list?
I do have a question. We have a local election coming up, and we have 4 places on the board of trustees of the library, and 2 current members are running again, but 2 are not. So we have, I think, a slate of 11 candidates
For four,
who have already filed. And when it comes up with the executive director search, when we talk about election and the changes in the board, is that a valid question to ask them? Like, okay, you're coming into a completely different administration that exists now.
Yeah, I would say in this first round, since it's not an existing question, we might refrain from that, but it would be a very important round, the question for the second round. And one other aspect of the second round that I think is worth emphasizing is it's also an opportunity for them to learn more about you. So while
Well,
Trish and I might have talked a little bit about upcoming election, we might specifically give them some more information about that before a second round interview so that they're ready to come and talk to you about that. Or it might be we give them more information about the budget, or we give them more information about org structure, or we give them more
well,
information about other stuff so that they are able to really answer those nitty-gritty questions in a second round interview with you because they have the context and the knowledge.
so I would just
Because-
interject really quick that while Amber's suggesting it could be something we ask them in the second round, you might want to be prepared that they ask you about it in the first round when they have open questions to ask. We've touched on it very lightly and it has come up in our screens, and I would not be shocked if it was brought up in their time for candidate questions. So I actually think it's going to be something they'll be asking you versus you asking them, and you could dig deeper in the second round if you'd like, but yeah.
Yeah. And that is
Because,
a last piece of the agenda we have here is after we finalize these questions, we want to prep you to consider what questions candidates might ask you. And that, like Trisha said, that's probably one of them.
Yeah, because candidates for the upcoming election are asking me. And so I'm basically saying to them, I cannot speak to in any official capacity about the executive director search or any of these things. But then they say, well, personally, what is it like to be a library trustee? Well, I can talk to that in the same way that I could talk to a potential executive director about what it's like. So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. To Monterima's point, any that folks particularly want to make sure they are the person asking in terms of assigning, and then we'll kind of circle back to this question of like, what might folks ask you?
It's interesting. I was looking at when we interviewed last time, and I kind of like when it's not necessarily like our pet question or something, like, and just, I think I don't know, I kind of like the randomness. I mean, starting with the chair of the committee, of course, makes all the sense in the world. But then going in a rotation, for me, I think that worked. But what do you think, Lee and Ted?
I mean, I would rather go that route. I like the flow when, you're assigned, and I have been in interviews where, people pick questions and it gets a little I like the order of going alphabetically. I think it just makes the interview process smoother.
Okay. If there's no objections, I'll just assign in that way. And then what I'll do with this final copy is as we've decided to share with all the candidates, I'll do that today along with the update on links that they should be using to interview and the recording. But then I will also finalize this document and share it with you all in an interview packet. So there was a draft attached to our email. I won't pull that up, so it does have candidate information in it. But I'll insert this into that packet and I'll attach it to your calendar invite so that when it comes time to conduct any interview, you can click on the attachment. You'll see the position profile, the information on mitigating bias, these finalized questions assigned to each of you, and all of the candidates' information in one spot on that calendar invite for each and every interview so you can find it really easy.
Sounds great, thank you, sounds really helpful.
And with that, I think I'll stop sharing my screen because this is a good time to kind of transition to Trisha's point of like what you might expect folks to ask you. I don't know that we need to go over like how we want to answer in detail right now, but more of we want to be sure to kind of give you a sense of what we're hearing from candidates and you might expect in that sense. Is there anything that you want to kind of start with, Trisha, beyond?
Can I ask a question about that?
Mhm.
Did you send slides from our bias training? Bias training
To you all?
to us? Yeah.
Oh, yes, and I can resend. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
I just wanted to, review them again and just bring my head back into that space because there were some additional bias, like that had not shown up in other.
Yeah. And in the slides aren't in the interview packet, but kind of a distillation of those biases are in the interview packet. So there's about 2 pages on kind of mitigating bias in an interview that'll hopefully serve as a bit of a refresher in the packet, but alongside we'll send those slides.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Trisha, is there anything else that you would want to flag? As I've got a couple of ideas, but want to see if there's anything that you would say, I really think candidates are going to ask you about this.
Well, I'm happy to know that one of you is in Bend, Oregon, where there are no problems with the weather, and the other is in Florida, where there are no problems with the weather. We've had 2 inches of snow.
Right now? You do?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm in Pennsylvania. Actually, right now it's very cold.
Oh.
So. Very cold, but no problems with weather. Yeah, I think the questions that you're going to be asked are one, certainly about the board election, if that comes up. I think the other, just fully aware that the candidates that are interviewing did read, do understand what has happened in the community, do understand, have read articles. Some have even watched past recordings of what has occurred, and not shying away from it, which is great, but they might ask like a little status update on where things stand and how everybody's feeling and what is the next. I just got a question yesterday from a candidate of like, well, do you know what success looks like in the first year for this person? And I think that a question just around like, what do you think will be the biggest challenge for this person walking into the role? What would you add, Amber?
I would add staff morale. I think folks are going to ask you about staff morale, your assessment of staff morale, that kind of thing. I think they might ask if there's any anticipated changes to the role, the organization, the funding. They might be pretty open-ended about it, but I think in addition to what Trisha has named, I think you can expect a question about staff morale and a question about any anticipated changes. And it might not be that every single candidate asks every single one of these questions, but these are kind of the themes that we're hearing that we've been saying, great question for the committee. Should you have a chance to meet with them?
This is one of the challenges.
That's really interesting to me that I had not thought that the candidate might ask us provocative questions, and I have to think about what my answers would be.
And that's a challenging area because if they've read articles, they may not understand what happened. And there's no way anybody can really understand because it's employment matter. So those are the kind of challenging parts, and it is an employment
don't-
matter. So how we talk about it is also limited, it's an employment matter. So we can't, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have thought
Sometimes
that
the question, yeah. Sometimes the questions from the candidates actually the best part. It's so conversational. I don't think you're going to get any questions from candidates like, "What? So what happened? Or how did you get to this point?" Or like, I don't think it's going to be that direct. I think it's very forward-looking, honestly.
And how do we decide who answers what?
Usually people decide on that spot of like, "Oh, I'd like to chime in on that," and then pass it around.
Do we have a time, like a timing for that to keep us on schedule?
We have 10 minutes, I believe, for candidate questions.
10 minutes for candidate questions. And then one thing we do tell candidates is if there's anything after an interview that you realize you have a question or you want to share, expand on an answer, send a thank you note, any of that, candidates are prepared to understand they have 10 minutes in real time, but that if they've got anything after their interview, they can share with Trish and I, and we'll facilitate getting to the committee. So we kind of ask them to prioritize their questions and like when they have you. But
People usually do that, like reach out after.
with thank you notes quite frequently, but sometimes folks will say, most often, and Trisha, I don't know if this is how you feel, so correct me if you disagree, but I feel like most often what I get from candidates is like, yeah, I have more questions, but if I move on to a second round, I'll ask them then.
Great. That's why I was asking about, if we have 10 minutes and they have more than one question, you've met us. We're a talkative bunch. And so, if I'm on Zoom and they're in person and everything, I want to make sure that I don't accidentally like interrupt and that sort of thing. So that's why I wanted to ask how we handle that.
Yeah. I will say especially given that we're sharing the questions with candidates now, really like planning to stick to 45 minutes worth of questions and 10 minutes for them at the end. But we specifically did not schedule you back to back because we know you're a talkative bunch. And so if you go over by a couple of minutes for them to ask their questions, we've purposely left some space just in case that maybe happens.
Oh, I
Not
think
that
we
we're
know.
encouraging it, just that we
But I also
planned
think we know
that
that it's
could
not just,
happen.
yeah, it's not a small chance that it's,
Yeah.
definitely more than a non-zero chance that will happen.
Yeah, we still want you to
That's
take a
a
break and
rough
like get a
Christmas
drink or whatever, but like,
I agree.
yeah, it thought that could happen and scheduled some time hopefully to go a little bit over if needed and still give you time to have a bit of a break between interviews.
Well, I mean, speaking of, I know that there are hard deadlines and we still haven't done closed session. Also, from the things that you wanted to cover in open session, I did want to talk about the competency rubric. That's something that we were expected to discuss in an open session, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the last question on our end. When I'm thinking about finalizing that interview packet, I know that you all have a rubric that you've used in the past, which we can include in that interview packet. I think Suzanne had earlier in previous conversations started a conversation on like, how do we want to align on these? If this rubric that you all have feels correct, if you feel aligned on it, if it's the one you want to use, that's what we'll put into our interview packet. That's how we'll ask you to take your notes. And that's what we'll use to structure our debrief after all interviews are complete. If you need more time to have that conversation on rubrics in particular, then we could supply our rubric, which is a bit broader. And then from there, as we move into a second round and as we move into a final round, and certainly as we're bringing other people into the conversation, really get much more specific with the rubric. So I think there was a question on our end of if you have an updated rubric or you want to use this that you have, or if you're comfortable with ours.
I liked the simpler one that you had.
Okay.
What about you all?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so that's what we'll
I
put
think-
into the
Yeah,
packet. And
our ED evaluation rubric was derived from the last job description, under which that ED was hired. So I think we have a new job description. I don't think that we should take much more time in trying to extract a rubric from that if it feels like it's largely going to come to the simpler version. I do have a question that I wanted to pause over a little bit, which is about the weightedness of each of these. So I understand that they're all categories. I agree that they're all important, but I didn't know if we all wanted to talk quickly about if they are of equal importance to each
Like,
other.
like a point system?
Well,
Can
they
you share
already
your
have a point
screen? Because
system.
I had Ignite open and it's now telling me it can't show me the things it showed me, 10 minutes ago.
sure, and I would say, let me. I'm going to pull up, this is the quickest thing. I'm going to pull back up the questions because the rubric aligns with these questions. So in the rubric, you'll see mission alignment, staff leadership development, empowerment, external community relations, all these things in gold. So I think Madarima's question is, do we want to weight any particular area higher than the other as we're filling out our rubrics? And I think, yeah, that is all of them right there.
I mean, just based on some of the feedback and surveys, I feel like they're pretty evenly weighted. If there was any slight weight, it might be towards community relations in terms of just like broadly what we've heard along the way from the need for the CD. But with only 5 categories, they're actually they're all pretty important.
They are.
Yeah, they
And
are very.
I don't know that each category should be weighted different. Is that what you were talking about, Madhurima?
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't have an opinion about. I just wanted to make sure that we paused to check that we were all comfortable with them being weighted equally. Like if we thought that, but I
In the
mean,
end, I'm gonna make a subjective decision.
you're going to make so. Yes, well, of course, but they are encouraging us, I think, to be consistent and to be fair and to mitigate our own biases that come
Yeah.
to the table. That I think they're encouraging us to use a point system, just like we use rubrics to grade our students. To make sure that they're actually being, that we have some evidence about why we liked this versus not. So I would also encourage us to run our subjective opinions through some of these lenses. I think it would be helpful.
I really appreciated that with the numbers you gave, kind of what each number represents.
Yeah.
That works.
It-
When I get just plain numbers, I just kind of, the way
yeah.
it doesn't. So that was very helpful.
Yeah. And I will say the numbers are important. And I'm glad that that kind of structure worked for you, Suzanne. We will still talk through everything because one person's 4 and another person's 2 might be different numerically. But when we start talking about it, you're like, oh, actually, we're saying the same thing. So the numbers are a really good guide in terms of how we're initially kind of structuring our debrief, but that conversation about like, okay, what did we hear that got us to this number is really helpful. So taking notes on responses, on what stuck out to you about people's experience and what they're bringing to the table in that sense is really helpful. So you've got that to refer back to.
Yeah. And I know that this is maybe a little, I don't know, not as black and white, but if we interview these people and we get to the debrief and then we're all debriefing and everybody keeps talking about community relations, and when I say everybody, I mean you, then we know we can actually kind of tell that maybe that's spiking higher. And then in the second round, we can consider that. Like, actually, this is something we need to go deeper on because it's spiking higher. Some of these things I know you just like learn through the process as you're interviewing. You learn. We're going to learn a lot from that first round interview too.
So I think that's everything we can talk about in open session. Trish and I have 2 additional candidates to propose for your consideration for first round interviews. Of course, we know we're moving into some interviews next Monday and Friday. I think we're prepared for that now. But now that we might be transitioning to talking about particular people and whether or not you want to interview them, I think we're ready for closed. Unless there's any, I guess maybe the last thing I'll say in open session. So I think there was a question on the scheduling. So our next meeting is going to be on the 24th. We'll use that time to debrief these interviews. And that is going to be really important for understanding our schedule moving forward in February. Because if on the 24th you say, yes, we're pumped, we want to send these 4 people forward to second round interviews, we're going to have to pull you for second round interviews and start scheduling those. So your schedule would change. If on the 24th you say, look, we learned X, Y, and Z, and actually we want to keep cultivating candidates, that will also have an impact on the schedule. So at the moment, we meet the 24th, the 7th, and the 21st. Those are kind of our next 3 meetings, but we'll be able to kind of confirm on the 24th details of what our calendar is actually going to look like, depending on how we feel about how these first round interviews go.
So what is the expected timeline for the second round interviews? I know that the dates have changed from the first time we had the timeline. So do we have a sense?
Well, it
Do we
depends on
Yeah,
what you just said.
Yeah. So if we meet on the 24th and you say, yes, we're ready to move into second round interviews, we will come prepared to that with a proposed format for what the second rounds might look like based on everything we've discussed previously. But we'll probably use the week of the 27th to finalize that format to make sure you're prepared, that you know what you'd like to ask, and to gather any information that we want to share with candidates as they're kind of moving to this next stage and getting to know you better as well, managing the schedule that week. So I know, Madarima, you're going away in February. We would probably try and get those second round interviews scheduled early in February so that we
Okay, that's great.
have you there for the second rounds. So maybe that's the
Yes.
week of the 3rd. Does that sound?
That's great. I mean, I think that, yeah, so I'm out of town. I'm out of town starting the 14th. I come back the 17th, and then I leave the 18th. So I feel like, yeah, if the second round is doable, obviously depending on a number of factors, but if it's doable within that
Before the
first week and
14th.
a half, yeah,
Yeah.
within that first week and a half of February, that would be great.
Yeah. And then of course, on the 24th, we can confirm if we're ready to move into the second rounds and want to use those first 2 weeks of February to do second round interviews, or if we need to do some additional candidate cultivation and conduct some additional first rounds. We'll know a little bit more, but certainly I think at this minute, that's the best prediction.
Okay, and I think
You're
that maybe
leaving, sorry. I just,
go ahead.
you're leaving town on the 18th again until when, just so I know we're not using any
March
dates.
3rd, March 3rd.
Okay, thank you, because we won't be using dates in there, correct? For interviews.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, because we wouldn't have quorum.
well, I
Well,
mean,
if
Suzanne and
Ted and
Ted
I
Not
are
will
a,
there.
both show up and, uh, how about we see what the shape is on the 24th, because I feel like right now I'm starting to borrow an anxiety that belongs in the future that maybe I don't need to delve in right now.
I'm a big fan of waiting to be anxious about stuff when it actually happens and not in advance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan in any case of saying that I'm going to be and then changing, not following through. But I did want to say that then this is probably a good time to mention that I think you were both copied on the email that I sent, or all of us were on the email that I sent to the board with questions about process and procedure. And there's potentially one of the things might still be up for a board discussion, which won't happen until the 28th of January, sorry, and that's about making sure that the entire board is actually signing off on the search committee doing first and second round interviews, because we were definitely in the clear about one, and then there was a sense, of course, that like the whole board wanted to chime in about who the finalists would be. And I think that there is, or has been some confusion about what that means about access to like the second round interviews. So I think that from what I can tell, I think it's going to be fine for the search committee to be able to make those decisions and have that conversation outside of a board meeting. But I think we will still need to, like,
Yeah.
we're going to need to talk to the board and make sure we actually have actual consensus about that.
And we don't have a contentious board, so.
It's true, we really don't. We really don't, and I feel very trusted by my colleagues, and I hope Suzanne and Ted do too about this process. But I think one of the ways that we keep maintaining that trust is making sure we don't take it for granted. So I'd like to, I want to make sure that gets cleared. But I don't think that changes anything drastic, except on the 24th, we may have to delay making some decisions formally until, we have the board meeting on the 28th.
Perfect. Okay.
So closed session? Is
Think so.
that what we're doing? Okay, is there
So
a
moved.
motion to, and is there a second?
Second. Can you
Thank
send me
you.
the link?
Yes, let me send you the link. All right,
Thank you.
we're going to move to closed session.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're moving from open to,
Ted, we ended closed session. Ted, do you have a motion?
could we have an open session?
Sorry?
Sorry, I'm sorry, may we adjourn?
No.
no.
I'm sorry,
I move that we decide that we interview the two new interview candidates that were proposed.
Okay, is
Is
there
that
a
clear?
second?
I second the
Yes,
motion.
thank you. You second the motion, thanks, Ted. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nay? All right, so moved. And I think with that, we are done with the work of open session, so I declare us adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.